Everybody's on steroids. The whole UFC, everybody.
Performance enhancers have been a huge problem in combat sports. Even today, rumors continue to circulate that a high number of fighters are still abusing these substances. Everyone wants a clean sport, and testing positive can be detrimental to a fighter's career. Since the UFC began enforcing proper drug testing, several big names have been busted for performance enhancers. For this list, we'll be going over some of the biggest names that have been tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. And be sure to let me know your thoughts on some of the biggest drug test failures down in the comments below. If you guys enjoy the video, let me know by leaving a like and subscribing. Now in no particular order, here's a list of the biggest drug test failures in MMA.
Are you ready?
Number 1. VITOR BELFORT. You knew it was coming. Almost anyone who watches MMA will know this entry. At one point, VITOR BELFORT looked to be one of the greatest talents the MMA world had ever seen, tearing through the middleweight division and taking out top-ranked opponents with ease.
He was a goddamn force of science. Yeah. I mean, that's what he was.
But that talent apparently didn't come without some help. VITOR's first offense came at Pride 32, after his loss to Dan Henderson, when he failed a drug test for elevated testosterone. Years later, he would earn a title shot at middleweight champion Chris Weidman. The fight was scheduled to take place at UFC 173. But VITOR BELFORT removed himself from the fight after it was announced that the NSAC had banned TRT. News came that BELFORT had failed an out-of-competition test for elevated testosterone in Nevada, which was one of the main reasons the NSAC decided to ban the controversial substance. BELFORT finally returned to face Weidman at UFC 187, but it was clear his inability to use TRT was taking a toll on his body.
I'm 10 years younger than him and he's got a way higher testosterone level. This guy's still cheating, I'm gonna make him pay for it tomorrow night.
VITOR lost the fight by TKO in the first round. Since his ban from competition, VITOR has looked to be a shell of his former dominant self, losing 4 of his next 6 fights. Number 2. CHAEL SONNEN. CHAEL SONNEN has always been one of the most entertaining fighters in MMA. Unfortunately, his career has been overshadowed by multiple drug test failures, which ultimately ended his time in the UFC in 2014. Sonnen has failed 2 random drug tests during his time with the UFC. His first violation came up after UFC 117. After nearly dethroning middleweight champion Anderson Silva, it was revealed that Sonnen had tested for 16 times the normal amount of testosterone that a normal person should have in their body.
Retest that! You must have caught me on a low day! That's right! I told them to feast their eyes and fantasize! I offer no apology! That's testosterone, ladies and gentlemen! CHAEL SONNEN is too goddamn macho for the standardized testing procedures of the California State Control Board!
In his second finding, he tested positive for not only 1, but 4 banned substances prior to his fight with Wanderlei Silva at UFC 175. He was subsequently banned for his second failed drug test in 2014, and served a 2-year suspension. Sonnen announced his retirement from the sport due to the failed drug test, and also had his UFC analyst position taken away. He eventually came out of retirement by signing with Bellator in 2016. Since then, he has won 2 of his last 4 fights. Number 3. Yoel Romero. During his career, Yoel Romero has taken out some of the best middleweights the UFC has to offer, including Jacare Souza, Lyoto Machida, and Chris Weidman. As Romero was well on his way to earning a title shot against middleweight champ Robert Whittaker, it was announced that Romero had failed a drug test. Romero was quick to deny the results, stating that he never intentionally took any performance enhancers. Yoel Romero blamed the drug test failure on a contaminated supplement. Both his team and USADA eventually came to an agreement, giving Yoel Romero a 6-month suspension. Still, that hasn't stopped fellow middleweights from accusing Romero of being a cheat his entire career. Much of that frustration could be attributed to Romero's history of cheating inside the octagon. Number 4. Anderson Silva.
All the needles in your ass, all the steroids will not help you.
There is no question Anderson Silva will always be regarded as a legend of the sport. That said, the fact that he has failed drug tests on 2 different occasions should not be overlooked. After Chris Weidman ended his 7-year reign over the middleweight division, Silva was pitted against Nick Diaz at UFC 183. Although Silva ended up winning the fight, the decision was overturned after Silva tested positive for 2 banned substances. Following the findings, Silva returned in 2016, but tested positive yet again in 2017. His second offense earned him a 1-year suspension. While I wouldn't say this destroys Silva's legacy, it certainly brings his career into question. Number 5. CRIS CYBORG. CRIS CYBORG has had a reputation for being a steroid user for almost her entire career, and some of that can largely be due to her muscular physique. Her appearance certainly hasn't done her any favors when it comes to avoiding performance-enhancing accusations. It all started back in December of 2011. Following her 16-second knockout over Hiroko Yamanaka, CYBORG tested positive for a banned substance. As a consequence, she was suspended for 1 year, stripped of her Strikeforce women's featherweight belt, and had her win overturned to a no contest. The violation impacted her severely, and it was one of the main reasons former UFC Women's Bantamweight champ Ronda Rousey refused to fight Cyborg, or so she says.
Stop taking steroids and make weight.
And she wasn't the only one. Former women's featherweight champion Germaine Duranamine also refused to defend her belt against Cyborg. Since the violation, she's complied with all the required testing of USADA, but her career still continues to be overshadowed by her test failure in Strikeforce. Number 6. Josh Barnett. As of right now, Josh Barnett holds the record for the most drug test failures in MMA. His first offense came after his win over Bobby Hoffman, when he tested positive for a banned substance, but he was only given a warning by the NSAC. Barnett was then given a title shot against Randy Couture, which he won by TKO to win the heavyweight title. However, after the bout, it was revealed that Barnett yet again tested positive for a banned substance and was stripped of his title. Years later, the number 2 ranked heavyweight Josh Barnett was signed to face off against number 1 ranked MMA legend Fedor Emelianenko, and they were scheduled to fight under the Affliction promotion. In the eyes of MMA fans, this was one of the most anticipated matchups of all time. Unfortunately, Barnett was pulled just 10 days before the fight, after failing yet another drug test. The entire event, as well as Affliction Entertainment, was cancelled as a result. Barnett requested that they test his B sample, hoping that there was an error in his test, but his B sample also came up positive. So to sum this up, Josh Barnett single-handedly caused the downfall of the Affliction promotion. Number 7. Jon Jones.
I don't even know why it was such a big thing in the first place. You know, I beat him fair and square the first time and off of steroids, and I beat him the second time off of steroids.
Jon Jones is perhaps one of the more popular examples when it comes to being flagged for banned substances. After becoming the youngest champion in the UFC at 23 years old and taking out the biggest names in the light heavyweight division, Jones quickly looked at becoming the greatest fighter of all time. However, his first offense came after his win against Daniel Cormier, when Jon Jones tested positive for cocaine. While cocaine obviously isn't a performance enhancer, it was only the first of several violations to come. His next positive test came ahead of his rematch with Daniel Cormier at UFC 200, when Jones tested positive for 2 banned substances, resulting in a 1-year ban as well as his removal from the event. Jones returned in 2017 to defeat Daniel Cormier and become the light heavyweight champion once again, but was stripped of his title and suspended shortly after for failing yet another drug test. Since then, he has reclaimed the title and has been tested rigorously, but that hasn't stopped some fans from speculating that his troubles with USADA aren't behind him. Number 8. Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar popping for performance enhancers is one of those cases that came as no surprise to anyone. Lesnar's entrance into the UFC was followed with a massive wave of hype and anticipation due to his professional wrestling background. It was clear the UFC did their best to push Lesnar to the top, granting him a title shot after only 1 win in the promotion. Lesnar had his ups and downs in the UFC before finally retiring in 2011. 5 years later, Lesnar announced his UFC return in 2015, facing off against knockout artist Mark Hunt in the co-main event of UFC 200. Although Lesnar came out of the fight with a unanimous decision victory over Hunt, the win was overturned after Lesnar tested positive for an estrogen blocker.
I'm a white boy, and I'm jacked. Deal with it.
Along with the win being overturned, Lesnar was suspended for 1 year and was fined $250,000. Lesnar hasn't competed since. Mark Hunt was obviously less than pleased, going off on both the UFC and Lesnar, despite a prior statement that he was expecting Lesnar to be juiced to the gills leading into the fight. Number 9. ALISTAIR Overeem. ALISTAIR Overeem is yet another fighter on this list that should come as a surprise to no one. For almost his entire career, there's been speculation that ALISTAIR Overeem has been on some type of performance enhancer. After making a big statement in his UFC debut, taking out former heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar in the first round, the former Strikeforce, Dream, and K1 Grand Prix champion ALISTAIR Overeem was set to take on then UFC heavyweight champion Junior Dos Santos in the main event at UFC 146. However, it all came to a halt when ALISTAIR Overeem was approached by the NSAC for a random drug test following a press conference for the event. Overeem apparently tried to get away from NSAC agents who were attempting to administer the test, but was unsuccessful, and ultimately tested positive for elevated testosterone. He and his team offered the defense that he had been prescribed a tainted substance for a back injury by a doctor, but the NSAC didn't buy it, and Overeem was suspended for 9 months. Dos Santos fought Frank Mir in the main event instead, finishing him in the second round. Following the failed drug test, Overeem went on to suffer a string of knockout defeats, losing 3 of his next 4 fights. Number 10. Royce Gracie.
Obviously there's some controversy after the Sakuraba fight. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened then?
I have no idea what they're talking about.
Out of all the fighters you would guess have used performance enhancers, Royce Gracie wouldn't likely be one of them. His accomplishments in the early days of the UFC truly are legendary, but it's often easy to forget that Royce Gracie once tested positive for steroids. The fight that Royce Gracie tested positive for was in association with his win over Kazushi Sakuraba at K1 Dynamite. While the first match saw Royce Gracie lose to Sakuraba after going 90 minutes before his corner finally threw in the towel, Royce Gracie earned his revenge in the rematch, winning the fight by decision. Unfortunately, his win was called into question after both his A and B samples came up positive, which resulted in an immediate suspension as well as a fine. Although Royce originally disputed these findings, as fighters usually tend to do, he accepted the charges and paid the fine. Even with the positive test, the California State Athletic Commission at the time did not have the means to overturn the win, so Royce Gracie's victory over Sakuraba still stands on his record. If you guys enjoyed the video, let me know by leaving a like and subscribing. And if you guys think I missed anything, just let me know down in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next video.
Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
You never have a doubt, do you like me now? Am I good enough now? Should I get more loud? Till you hear the fucking sound? Oh no, I'm losing my shit again, having to fit again. Man, I'm forgetting when I used to have some friends. I used to play pretend, we all grow up and then hating my phone and trends. I'm about to blow my head, nobody knows I'm dead. Fear I'm a ghost instead, think that I'm close, I get straight comatose in bed. Try to go slow with breath, breathe out my nose and head. Heart doesn't go the trend, faster it goes.